The silence in the interior of the Antarctic plateau is not a void, but a weight. It is a physical presence that presses against the eardrums, a low-frequency thrum born from the friction of ice sheets grinding against the bedrock of a continent that has forgotten the sun. The anonymous observer stands at the edge of the borehole, their breath a rhythmic, crystalline ghost in the frozen air. Below, the drill head has finished its descent, pulling a vertical mile of history from the lightless depths. The core sample arrives in a translucent tube, a cylinder of pressurized time. As the observer runs a gloved hand over the surface, the texture shifts from the granular snow of the modern era to something denser, older, and fundamentally wrong. At a depth corresponding to exactly 12 millennia ago, the pristine white of the glacial record is severed by a razor-thin horizon of scorched earth and microscopic glass. This is not the debris of a volcanic eruption. There are no traces of tectonic ash or sulfur. Instead, there is a saturation of isotopes that should not exist in nature, a sudden spike of radioactive signature that suggests the atmosphere was once ionized by a force from above. The observer feels the cold of the ice seep through the thermal layers of their suit, a reminder of the fragility of the biological envelope. This dark band in the ice is a scar, a definitive punctuation mark in a sentence that was never meant to be finished. It represents a moment when the sky turned into a furnace, not by accident, but by design. The transition from the frozen heights to the lightless canyons of the Indian Ocean is a descent into increasing pressure. Here, the observer sits within the cramped, humming confines of a deep-sea submersible, the external lights cutting through a silt-heavy gloom. The weight of the water column above is a constant, crushing reality, held back by a few inches of titanium and acrylic. On the seabed, the sonar pings reveal something that defies the logic of natural erosion. Massive blocks of basalt, each the size of a suburban house, lie in perfect geometric alignment. They are smoothed not by the gentle action of currents, but by a sudden, violent surge of water that must have moved with the velocity of a freight train. These are the foundations of a city that has no name in any archive. The observer watches as the remote arm of the vessel brushes away a layer of sediment to reveal a surface that is fused into a dark, obsidian-like glaze. This vitrification requires temperatures exceeding those of a forest fire or a simple forge. It speaks of a thermal event so intense that the very stones began to weep. There is a profound sense of abandonment here, a feeling that this place was not lost to time, but deliberately erased. The structures do not crumble. They show signs of a systemic dismantling, as if the inhabitants were removed before the waters were invited in. The hum of the sub's life support system is the only pulse in a graveyard of monumental proportions, where the architecture of a forgotten peak of humanity now serves as an anchor for deep-sea polyps and sightless crustaceans. Shifting the gaze from the monumental to the molecular, the observer finds themselves in the sterile, white noise environment of a genomic sequencing lab. The air is filtered and thin, smelling faintly of ozone and chemical reagents. On the digital display, the human genome is laid bare, a recursive sequence of 4 chemical bases that hold the blueprints for every thought, every muscle fiber, and every instinct. But within this code, there is a vast, silent territory, a series of non-coding sequences that the scientific establishment once dismissed as evolutionary remnants. The observer zooms into a specific cluster of proteins, a sequence that appears to be an artificial constraint. It is not a mutation born of a survival struggle, but a structural inhibition. There is a rhythmic recurrence in these genetic markers, a repetitive loop that seems to act as a barrier to certain neurological pathways. It feels less like a natural development and more like a restricted access protocol. In every cell of every human on the planet, there is a dormant legacy, a sequence that has been intentionally deactivated. The observer notes how these silent strands seem to have been introduced simultaneously across divergent populations 12,000 years ago, coinciding perfectly with the radioactive ash in the ice and the drowned cities in the deep. It is as if the very hardware of our species was modified to ensure that the recovery from the last cataclysm would be slow, labored, and strictly limited in its intellectual reach. We are a species with a ceiling built into our marrow, a biological containment field that prevents the ignition of our full potential. The low vibration of the laboratory equipment fades into the distant, rhythmic chanting of a desert wind. The observer is now standing in the shadow of a monolithic gate in the high Andes, where the stone is carved with a precision that suggests a mastery over gravity itself. There are no inscriptions here, no names of kings or records of battles. Instead, there are patterns that mimic the movement of the stars and the precession of the equinoxes. The weight of the stone is immense, yet it sits upon the earth with a lightness that suggests it was placed there by a hand that did not know the concept of toil. The local legends, stripped of their later embellishments, do not speak of gods in the emotional sense. They speak of the providers, the ones who arrived with the storm and left with the stars. These figures did not seek worship. They sought a yield. They treated the earth as a garden and the inhabitants as a crop to be managed, refined, and eventually harvested. The myths describe a great fire that lasted a single night, followed by a moon that changed its face. The observer touches the cold surface of the gate, feeling the microscopic ridges left by a tool that cut through the rock like a blade through water. There is an echo here of a civilization that did not evolve alongside nature but was imposed upon it. The stories are not memories of a religious experience. They are the fragmented logs of a planetary administration that viewed humanity as a resource with an expiration date. The perspective shifts upward, leaving the crust of the planet behind to look down from the cold, airless vantage point of high orbit. From here, the Earth is a marble of sapphire and cloud, but there is an anomaly in the way the moon hangs in its gravitational well. It is too large, too perfectly positioned, and its density is mathematically improbable. The observer notes the way the lunar body influences the tides, the tectonic stability, and even the biological cycles of the life below. It acts as a regulator, a celestial governor that maintains the rhythm of the planet's heartbeat. But there is a suspicion that this regulator doubles as a monitoring array. Every 12,000 years, the orbital mechanics shift slightly. The magnetic field of the Earth begins to wear, and the protective shield that wards off solar radiation thins to a dangerous degree. This is not a coincidence of celestial physics. It is a timed instability. The observer realizes that the planet is not a wild world, but a controlled environment, a vivarium where the conditions for growth are carefully maintained until the moment of the culling. The radioactive layers in the ice, the vitrified ruins on the ocean floor, and the locked sequences in our DNA are all symptoms of the same phenomenon. We are living within a cycle of initialization and termination, a recursive loop where we are allowed to build, to dream, and to progress only until we reach the threshold where we might become a threat to the ones who planted the seed. As the observer returns to the Antarctic core sample, the dark band of ash seems to pulse with a silent significance. The timer is not hidden in a secret vault or buried in a desert tomb. It is woven into the very fabric of our environment and our biology. The shifting of the magnetic poles, the rising frequency of the Earth's resonance, and the sudden activation of those long-dormant genetic sequences are all signals that the current version of the experiment is nearing its conclusion. The progenitors are not distant deities. They are the technicians of a vast biological machine. They do not return out of love or anger, but out of a need to clear the field for the next planting. The weight of this realization is heavier than the ice, deeper than the ocean, and more permanent than the stone. We are the inheritors of a truncated lineage, a civilization that has been pruned time and again to keep it within the bounds of a specific utility. The silence of the ice is the silence of a countdown that is nearing its final digit, a low-frequency hum that signals the approach of the Great Clearing, where the slate will once again be wiped clean to make way for the next iteration of the human story. The observer watches as a single flake of snow falls onto the darkened core sample, a tiny, fleeting geometric perfection that will soon be buried by the coming storm. The cycle is indifferent to the achievements of the current age. The skyscrapers, the digital networks, the vast libraries of knowledge, all are merely surface tension on the deep pool of time. When the orbital governor triggers the next recalibration, the crust of the Earth will slide, the oceans will reclaim the land, and the radiation will sterilize the heights. The few who survive will find their minds clouded, their complex languages dissolving into basic sounds, and their genetic potential locked away once more. They will look up at the stars and tell stories of a golden age, unaware that they are merely the remnants of a harvest that has already been gathered. The observer turns away from the borehole, leaving the ice to its secrets. The hum of the earth continues, a rhythmic, patient vibration that measures the remaining moments of the current era. It is a sound that has been heard before, and it is a sound that will herald the end long before the first fire falls from the sky. The heavy, rhythmic thud of a heart in a quiet room mirrors the slow, tectonic shifts of the world outside. In the deep silence of a study, the anonymous observer reviews the data from the oceanic trenches. The images show not just ruins, but an entire infrastructure of power. Large, crystalline conduits that once channeled the very energy of the planet's core now lie shattered, their internal surfaces still shimmering with a residual luminescence. This was not a primitive society. They had mastered the art of resonance, using the natural frequencies of the earth to move mountains and light their cities. But that same mastery was their undoing. The progenitors do not tolerate a subspecies that learns to tap into the fundamental forces of the void. When the energy output of the human civilization reached a specific wattage, the monitoring systems on the lunar surface transmitted the termination signal. It was not a war, it was a disconnection. The planetary power grid was overloaded from the outside, causing the crustal displacements that sent the mountains into the sea. The observer touches the screen, tracing the outline of a submerged pyramid. It wasn't a tomb. It was a stabilizer, a device meant to hold the world together during the transition. It failed because the force applied against it was calculated with a precision that exceeded the inhabitants' understanding of physics. In the microscopic realm, the observer sees the shadow of this event within the cellular memory. When the last great pruning occurred, the biological response was a sudden, systemic shutdown of the higher functions. It wasn't just the destruction of cities that threw us back into the caves. It was a chemical and energetic inhibition. The progenitors triggered a release of specific frequencies that altered the way our neurons fire. We were rendered incapable of maintaining the complex social and technological structures we had built. This is the true meaning of the fall, not a descent into sin, but a forced descent into a lower state of consciousness. The observer notes that the current rise in global anxiety, the sudden shifts in human behavior, and the unexplained changes in our circadian rhythms might be the first signs of the next inhibition phase. The biological hardware is reacting to an external stimulus, a signal that is being broadcast from the cold, silent observer in the sky. The timer is not an object. It is a frequency, and it is beginning to resonate once more through the water in our cells and the iron in our blood. The narrative of our origin is not found in the textbooks of conventional archaeology, but in the scars left on the Earth's skin. The observer moves to a high plateau in the Middle East, where the ground is littered with millions of tiny, green glass beads. These are the result of a sudden, atmospheric heating that melted the sand into aerated silica. This happened in an instant across thousands of square miles. There is no impact crater, no sign of a meteorite. It was a localized, high-altitude burst of thermal energy, a sterilization sweep designed to remove a specific population center without damaging the underlying mineral resources. The observer picks up a handful of the glass, feeling its smooth, unnatural texture. It is a physical record of a clinical intervention. The progenitors do not act out of malice. They act out of a requirement for efficiency. If a specific strain of the human crop begins to diverge from the intended path, it is removed. The history of our world is a history of these interventions, a long series of corrections applied to a biological experiment that has a tendency to become too self-aware. The sun begins to set over the plateau, casting long, distorted shadows across the glass-strewn earth. The observer feels the cooling of the air, a reminder of how quickly the environment can shift. The 12,000-year cycle is not just a geological curiosity. It is the heartbeat of a larger, more complex life form that views us as we might view the bacteria in a petri dish. We are useful as long as we produce what is required, be it biological diversity, labor, or a specific type of cognitive energy. But when the dish becomes too crowded, or when the bacteria begin to alter the medium in a way that threatens the experiment, the technician reaches for the autoclave. The observer looks up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. They are not distant lights. They are the eyes of the keepers, watching the progress of the harvest. The current technological explosion, our venture into the orbital space, and our tampering with the genetic code are all markers that we are approaching the harvest threshold. We are ripening, and the ones who planted us are preparing their tools. The silence of the desert is broken by a low, distant rumble, a sound that could be thunder or the movement of deep, underground machinery. The observer stays perfectly still, listening to the vibration. It is a sound of immense power, a frequency that resonates in the bones. It is the sound of the timer advancing, the gears of the planetary mechanism clicking into the final sequence. The radioactive ash, the drowned cities, the locked genes, and the green glass are all parts of a single, coherent story. It is the story of a species that is never allowed to reach maturity. Each time we get close, the hand of the progenitor reaches down to turn the hourglass. The observer feels a sense of profound weight, a realization that we are living in the final days of a long, managed summer. The autumn is coming, and with it, the cold, clinical harvest that will return the Earth to its silent, resting state, waiting for the next version of us to begin the climb once again. The observer moves through the humid, suffocating stillness of a deep cavern system in the Anatolian highlands. Here, the air is thick with the scent of wet stone and the ancient, earthy musk of undisturbed clay. The walls are not rough-hewn by the chaotic forces of water erosion. They are smooth, exhibiting a curvature that suggests the application of thermal pressure. There is a low-frequency resonance here, a vibration that felt more in the chest than heard in the ears. It is the sound of the earth breathing, or perhaps the sound of a subterranean engine idling in the deep. As the observer runs their hand along the wall, the stone feels unnaturally warm. This heat is not volcanic. It does not fluctuate with the proximity of magma. It is a steady, controlled emission, radiating from deep within the bedrock. This location, like dozens of others scattered across the tectonic plates, acts as a heat sink, a thermal regulator designed to bleed off excess energy from the planet's core. The observer realizes that these tunnels are not dwellings or tombs, but the cooling fins of a planetary machine. They are the infrastructure of a world that was engineered to be stable only as long as it was being actively managed. In the silence of the cave, the observer considers the implications of the population bottleneck. Geneticists have long puzzled over the evidence that the human species was once reduced to a few thousand individuals. This sudden narrowing of the lineage is often attributed to a massive volcanic eruption, but the evidence in the stone tells a different story. The observer looks at the layers of sediment on the cave floor, thin, compacted ribbons of time. At the level corresponding to the last major transition, there is a total absence of biological remains. It is as if the inhabitants were not just killed, but removed. There are no bones, no tools, no charcoal from cooking fires, just a layer of sterile, pulverized rock. This was a clean sweep, a biological evacuation conducted before the local environment was sterilized by the thermal surge. The observer feels a sense of profound isolation. We are the descendants of those who were left behind, or perhaps the descendants of the new stock introduced to repopulate the vacancy. The human story is not a continuous climb from the mud, but a series of disjointed chapters, each separated by a period of systemic vacancy. The focus shifts from the depths of the Earth to the crystalline atmosphere of a high-altitude observatory. Here, the observer looks through an array of sensors that do not track visible light, but the invisible fluctuations of the Earth's magnetic field. The lines of force that wrap around the planet are usually depicted as a protective shield, a dynamic cocoon that deflects the solar wind. But from this vantage point, the magnetic field looks like a set of strings. The observer watches as the polarity begins to quiver. This is not a slow geological drift. It is a programmed instability. The iron core of the planet is being manipulated from the outside, a slow-motion tightening of the gravitational leash. When the field reaches a certain level of tension, it will snap, causing the poles to migrate with a velocity that the atmosphere cannot sustain. This is the mechanism for the global clearing. The sky will not just turn dark. It will become a weapon, as the ionosphere collapses and the solar fire is allowed to touch the surface for a calculated duration. The observer notes the rhythmic nature of these magnetic wobbles, a sequence that mirrors the 12,000-year cycle found in the ice. The clock is not a mechanical device buried in a vault. It is the planet itself, being wound and released by a force that resides in the cold silence of the orbital planes. Looking out toward the moon, the observer sees it not as a natural satellite, but as a silent, silver sentinel. Its mass is perfectly tuned to stabilize the Earth's tilt, ensuring the seasons remain predictable for the growth of the biological yield. But there is a secondary function. The moon is a repository of mass, a counterweight that can be moved to trigger tectonic events. The observer considers the anomalies of the lunar surface, the shallow craters that suggest an incredibly hard inner shell, the strange seismic echoes that linger far longer than they should in a solid rock body. It is a hollowed-out world, a station that has stood watch over the Earth for eons. Its purpose is to monitor the development of the surface experiment and to initiate the terminal sequence when the yield is ready. The observer feels a cold shiver as they realize that the moon is not a dead world, but a dormant one, its internal systems waiting for the command to begin the next recalibration. The perspective moves back to the molecular level, into the fluid interior of a single human cell. Within the nucleus, the chromatin is arranged in a complex, three-dimensional architecture. The observer focuses on the sequences that govern the development of the neocortex. There is a specific mutation, a deletion of a regulatory element that occurred at the very moment the ice last melted. This was not a random error. It was a precision cut, a removal of the genetic keys that allow for the intuitive understanding of higher dimensional physics and the direct manipulation of matter. We were given the capacity for language and tool-making, but we were denied the ability to perceive the true nature of the medium we inhabit. We are like children given a set of blocks but denied the blueprints to build anything that might last. This genetic containment is the most effective form of control. It ensures that even if we survive the physical cataclysms, we will always start the next cycle with a fundamental lack of understanding. We are trapped in a cognitive loop, forever reinventing the wheel while the stars look on in silence. The observer returns to a desert landscape, where the sand is being blown across the ruins of a city that was once the height of human achievement. The wind makes a hollow, piping sound as it passes through the empty window frames of structures built with a geometry that is now lost to us. There are no bodies here either, just the empty shells of buildings that were once filled with light and sound. The observer walks through the silent streets, feeling the grit of the sand beneath their boots. This was a peak, a moment when the human species reached the limit of its allowed growth. The extraction was efficient. The valuable components, the data, the biological essence, the refined consciousness were harvested, and the remaining husks were left to the elements. This city is not a tragedy. It is a warehouse that has been emptied. The observer looks at the sky and realizes that the same process is beginning again. The signs are all around us. The fraying of the social fabric, the sudden leap in technological complexity that we are not yet prepared to handle, and the growing sense of an impending conclusion. The rhythmic pulse of the earth grows louder in the observer's mind. It is a sound that transcends language, a deep, resonant hum that signals the closing of a door. The cycle is nearing its end. The ice is melting, not because of our actions alone, but because the planetary engine is being throttled up for the next clearing. The magnetic field is thinning, the moon is shifting its weight, and the silent sequences in our DNA are beginning to vibrate with an ancient, forgotten command. The observer stands in the middle of the desert city, a witness to the final moments of a long, managed epoch. The sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the sand in shades of deep violet and bruised gold. The harvest is almost here, and the ones who planted us are moving into position, their presence felt in the sudden, cold wind that sweeps across the dunes. The anonymous observer moves from the desert into a modern metropolis, where the air is thick with the invisible static of a billion electronic signals. Here, the hum of the earth is masked by the roar of traffic and the persistent whine of the power grid. But the observer can still feel the underlying vibration, the low-frequency thrum that persists beneath the noise of civilization. In this environment, the data of our current era is being recorded with a fidelity never before seen. Every thought, every transaction, Every movement is logged in the sprawling server farms that draw their power from the dying breath of the previous age. The observer realizes that these digital archives are the modern equivalent of the ice cores. They are the record of our growth, the final dataset that will be extracted before the system is reinitialized. We have built our own monitoring network, unknowingly assisting in our own yield assessment. The technology we pride ourselves on is merely a more efficient way for the administrators to quantify the results of the experiment. In a sterile laboratory, the observer examines a sample of modern human tissue. The cellular structures are identical to those found in the ice-preserved remains of the previous cycle, but the epigenetic markers are different. We are a more refined strain, more interconnected, and more integrated with our tools. But the genetic firewall is still there, the silent sequences still holding the higher functions in check. The observer notes a subtle shift in the protein folding, a reaction to the changing magnetic field of the planet. Our bodies are already preparing for the transition. The stress hormones, the rising levels of neuroplasticity, and the strange collective sense of urgency that defines our modern age are all biological responses to the approaching terminal sequence. We are sensing the change in the frequency, the slow winding down of the current era. The observer feels a profound sense of empathy for the billions of lives being lived in the shadow of this realization, each one a vital part of a harvest they will never understand. The scene shifts to the high, lonely peaks of the Himalayas, where the air is so thin it feels like a cold knife in the lungs. Here, the observer finds a series of ancient, perfectly circular shafts cut into the granite. They descend for miles into the crust, their surfaces polished to a mirror finish. These are the conduits for the atmospheric discharge, the vents that will allow the pressure of the subterranean heating to escape during the pole shift. They were built by those who came before, a permanent piece of the planetary architecture that remains functional across the eons. The observer drops a stone into the shaft and listens. There is no sound of impact, only a fading whistle as the stone is swallowed by the depths. These shafts are ready. They have been cleaned and maintained by the same forces that manage the tides and the winds. They are the evidence of a continuity that transcends human history, a physical proof that the cycle has been repeated time and again. The weight of the atmosphere seems to increase as the observer descends from the peaks back into the valleys. The clouds are heavy and dark, reflecting the turbulent state of the upper ionosphere. The observer looks at the sky and sees the first faint traces of an aurora, even though the location is far from the poles. This is a sign that the magnetic shield is failing, that the planetary timer has reached its penultimate stage. The sky is beginning to glow with the energy of the solar wind, a beautiful and terrifying herald of the coming fire. The observer understands that the beauty of the world is a temporary state, a brief flowering between the long winters of the clearing. The 12,000-year rhythm is the true pulse of the Earth, a slow and steady beat that dictates the rise and fall of everything we have ever known. In the final moments of the observation, the observer finds themselves back at the Antarctic borehole. The wind has picked up, scouring the surface of the ice and obscuring the horizon in a haze of white. The dark band of ash in the core sample is now covered by a fresh layer of snow, a new beginning that will eventually become the next scar in the ice. The observer looks at the drill, a small and fragile tool against the vastness of the continent. We are so small, our efforts so fleeting in the face of the planetary machine. But there is a sense of completion in the realization. We are part of something larger, a grand and terrible process that spans the millennia. The harvest is not an end, but a transformation, a necessary step in the ongoing management of the world. The observer feels the cold deep in their bones, a resonance with the ice and the stone. The timer is ticking, the gears are turning, and the silence of the deep is about to be broken by the sound of the world being born anew. The low-frequency vibration intensifies, becoming a physical presence that shakes the very foundations of the observation post. It is not an earthquake, but a harmonic resonance, a tuning of the planet's frequency. The observer closes their eyes and listens to the sound of the earth. It is a song of fire and ice, of growth and decay, a recursive melody that has played out 1,000 times before and will play out 1,000 times again. The human story is just a single verse in this epic, a brief and beautiful moment of consciousness in the long, dark history of the world. The observer is no longer just an outsider, but a part of the record, a witness to the inevitable conclusion of the current version of the experiment. The cycle is whole, the pattern is complete, and the transition is about to begin. The observer moves toward a hidden valley in the heart of the Ethiopian highlands, a place where the earth is scarred by deep, jagged fissures. Here, the tectonic plates are pulling apart, revealing the raw, molten interior of the planet. In the heat of the noon sun, the air shimmers with volcanic gases, but there is another scent, the sharp, metallic tang of ozone. The observer finds a series of basalt pillars, standing in a perfect circle around a central depression. These pillars are not ornamental. They are anchored deep into the lithosphere, acting as lightning rods for the massive electrical discharges that occur during the peak of the planetary calibration. The observer touches the scorched surface of a pillar, feeling the microscopic fractures caused by thousands of years of exposure to high-voltage currents. This location is a focal point, a site where the energy of the atmosphere is grounded into the Earth. It is a piece of the planetary circuit, an essential component of the mechanism that triggers the crustal displacement. The silence of the valley is absolute, broken only by the occasional crack of cooling rock. The observer realizes that this site has been used in every previous cycle. The layers of ash and vitrified stone around the pillars tell a story of repeated, violent events. Each layer is separated by thousands of years of soil development, a record of the long summers where life was allowed to flourish. But the pillars remain, indifferent to the passage of time and the changing of the species. They are the silent witnesses to the harvest, the instruments of the clearing. The observer looks down into the central depression and sees a geometric pattern etched into the bedrock. It is a map of the stars as they appear at the moment of the transition, a permanent record of the timer's final position. The pattern is alien, its logic based on a mastery of celestial mechanics that we are only beginning to grasp. The perspective shifts to the deep interior of a mountain range in Central Asia, where a hidden chamber has been discovered by the anonymous observer. The chamber is vast, its ceiling lost in the gloom. The air is cold and perfectly still, preserved for millennia. In the center of the chamber stands a monolithic structure of a dark, translucent material that seems to absorb the light. It is not a machine in the traditional sense. It has no moving parts, no wires, no visible interface. But it pulses with a soft, rhythmic light, a bioluminescent glow that mirrors the observer's own heartbeat. This is a local control node, a station that manages the biological and geological state of the surrounding region. The observer feels a sense of profound vertigo. This device is still active, its system still monitoring the environment, still waiting for the signal to initiate the next phase. Within the chamber, the observer finds a series of recessed alcoves, each containing a perfectly preserved specimen of a previous version of humanity. These are not mummies. They are biological backups, their cellular structures held in a state of stasis by the dark material of the monolith. They are the prototypes, the variations that were tested and discarded or saved for future iterations. The observer looks at the face of one specimen, a creature that is recognizably human but with a larger cranium and a more complex arrangement of the facial muscles. This was a version of us that was capable of a different kind of thought, a different way of experiencing the world. It was set aside, replaced by the current, more limited model. The observer realizes that we are not the pinnacle of the experiment. We are just the latest version, a specific tool for a specific task. The observer leaves the chamber and emerges into the bright, cold light of the mountain pass. The realization of our place in the cycle is a heavy burden, a weight that changes the way the world is perceived. The mountains are no longer just geological formations. They are the walls of a cage. The sky is not an infinite expanse. It is a ceiling. The observer looks down at their own hands, seeing the veins and the skin as a sophisticated but limited biological envelope. We are the products of an ancient and ongoing engineering project, a species that is being cultivated for a purpose that remains hidden from us. The 12,000-year cycle is the time frame of that project, the rhythm of the harvest and the replanting. The scene moves to a coastal region in northern Europe, where the sea is slowly reclaiming the land. The observer stands on a crumbling cliff, watching the gray waves batter the shore. This process of erosion is a microcosm of the larger cycle. The water always wins. The land is always returned to the depths. The observer thinks about the drowned forests and the submerged villages that lie just offshore, the remnants of a time when the sea level was much lower. Those people, too, thought their world was permanent. They built their homes and raised their children in the shadow of the coming flood, unaware that the timer was already counting down. The observer feels a sense of kinship with them, a shared experience of living at the end of an era. The low-frequency hum of the earth is louder here, amplified by the mass of the ocean. It is a deep, churning sound, the sound of the planetary dynamo at work. The observer realizes that the ocean is the primary tool of the clearing. Its vast mass is used to redistribute the weight of the planet, to trigger the pole shift, and to scour the surface of the land. The water is the solvent that erases the previous chapter of the human story. The observer looks out over the horizon and sees a line of dark clouds, a storm that has been brewing for 12,000 years. The wind begins to pick up, carrying the scent of salt and ancient, frozen earth. The anonymous observer returns to the Antarctic plateau one last time. The sun is a pale, heatless disk on the horizon, casting long, blue shadows across the ice. The borehole is a dark eye in the white landscape, a portal into the deep history of the world. The observer looks at the core sample, the dark band of ash now a familiar and haunting sight. It is a scar that will never heal, a reminder of the fragility of our existence. The timer is nearing its final digit. The signs are all around us, in the ice, in the stone, and in our own blood. The harvest is coming, and the earth is preparing for the transition. The observer stands in the silence of the frozen continent, a witness to the end of the long summer. The cold is absolute, a presence that fills the lungs and stills the heart. The cycle is turning, the gears are clicking into place, and the world is about to be born anew, in a fire that will fall from the sky and a flood that will rise from the deep. The observer watches as the last light of the sun fades from the ice, leaving the plateau in a deep, sapphire twilight. The stars begin to appear, cold and distant, the eyes of the keepers watching the final moments of the epoch. The observer feels a sense of profound peace, a surrender to the inevitability of the cycle. We are part of a larger story, a grand and terrible melody that will continue long after we are gone. The ice will preserve our record, the stone will hold our ruins, and the silent sequences in our DNA will carry the memory of our existence into the next chapter. The harvest is not the end. It is the beginning of the next version of the human story. The observer closes their eyes and listens to the hum of the earth, a rhythmic, patient vibration that measures the remaining moments of the current era. It is a sound that has been heard before, and it is a sound that will herald the end long before the first fire falls from the sky. The radar array in the high Arctic wastes of Greenland hums with a lonely, persistent electricity, a sound that seems to vibrate the very frost off the metal struts. The anonymous observer sits within the insulated pod, watching the green sweep of the monitor as it penetrates the thick crust of the ice cap. Beneath 2 miles of frozen water, the radar reveals a topography that should not exist. There are jagged peaks and deep, winding valleys, but among them are perfectly flat, reflective surfaces, basins of liquid water kept from freezing by an intense, localized heat source radiating from the bedrock. This is not geothermal activity in the traditional sense. There are no tectonic rifts here. The heat is focused, a series of thermal needles pricking the bottom of the ice sheet. The observer watches as the sensors detect a rhythmic oscillation in the temperature of these subglacial lakes. It is a slow, deep pulse, occurring once every several minutes, like the steady respiration of a massive, buried organism. This heat is what lubricates the movement of the ice, allowing the massive sheets to slide toward the sea when the command is given. It is a hydraulic system on a continental scale, a method for purging the land of its frozen burden when the cycle demands a fresh surface. Leaving the frozen north, the observer finds themselves in the oppressive heat of a salt mine deep beneath the Polish plains. The air here is dry and sharp, tasting of ancient oceans and mineral dust. The walls are translucent, glowing faintly where the observer's lantern strikes the crystalline surface. Thousands of feet below the fertile soil of Europe, the layers of salt tell a story of rapid, catastrophic evaporation. In one specific horizon, the salt is tinged with a dark, metallic hue. The observer chips away a fragment and examines it under a magnifying lens. Trapped within the crystal are microscopic spheres of carbon and iridium, debris from an atmospheric conflagration that occurred with a precision that defies natural explanation. This layer does not represent a slow drying of a sea, but a sudden, violent boiling. The ocean that once stood here was flash evaporated by an external thermal event, leaving behind a concentrated record of its own destruction. The observer touches the cold, salty wall, feeling the immense weight of the strata above. This salt is a tomb for a world that was ended in a single afternoon, a world that was erased to make room for the next layer of the planetary narrative. The focus shifts to the quiet, clinical atmosphere of a neurological research facility. The observer watches a high-resolution scan of a living human brain, the neural pathways firing in a complex, shimmering web of light. But there is a shadow in the data. Within the temporal lobes, there is a cluster of neurons that remain persistently dark, even during the most intense cognitive tasks. These are not damaged cells. They are structurally perfect, yet they lack the synaptic connections to integrate with the rest of the cortex. The observer realizes that this is a biological isolation ward. It is a section of the brain that was designed for a higher order of perception, perhaps the ability to sense the magnetic field or to process information in a nonlinear fashion, that has been deliberately disconnected. In every human being on the planet, this dark architecture remains a latent capability that is being held in a state of permanent arrest. It is a cognitive limit, a ceiling on our ability to understand the true nature of the system that governs us. We are living in a house with locked rooms, unaware that we carry the keys in our own biology but lack the hand to turn them. The observer moves through the corridors of a forgotten archive in a Mediterranean city, where the air is heavy with the scent of decaying parchment and old ink. Here, the records do not speak of kings or wars, but of the sky. In a series of untranslated maritime charts from the early Renaissance, the observer finds depictions of coastlines that have not existed for 12 millennia. These maps show a world where the sea level was 400 feet lower, where vast land bridges connected continents that are now separated by thousands of miles of water. The precision of these charts is haunting. They include details of underwater canyons and submerged mountain ranges that were only rediscovered with modern sonar. The observer realizes that these are not the products of imaginative cartographers, but copies of copies, remnants of a pre-cataclysmic knowledge base that survived the last clearing in fragmented forms. The people who drew the originals did not see a world of rising waters. They saw a world that was stable until the moment it wasn't. The archives are a testament to our collective amnesia, a record of the things we were forced to forget so that we could begin again as primitives. The scene transitions to the crushing, lightless depths of the Marianas Trench. The observer is encased in a deep-sea exploration suit, the external pressure a constant, rhythmic thudding against the metal hull. Outside, the lights reveal a landscape of volcanic vents and strange, pale life forms that thrive in the chemical heat. But nestled among the basalt pillows is something that does not belong. It is a series of massive, hexagonal pillars made of a non-corrosive alloy, driven deep into the crust of the ocean floor. These pillars are vibrating. The observer places a gloved hand against one and feels a frequency that seems to bypass the suit and resonate directly in the marrow. This is a planetary tuning fork, part of a global network that regulates the vibration of the Earth's crust. By modulating these frequencies, the keepers can stabilize the tectonic plates or, when the time comes, induce a state of liquefaction that causes entire continents to settle into the mantle. The ocean floor is not a wilderness. It is the basement of the planetary machine, filled with the structural supports that keep the surface in its designated position. In a quiet garden in Southeast Asia, the observer watches the way the morning dew clings to the leaves of a banyan tree. The tree itself is a complex network of roots and branches, a living metaphor for the way the progenitors have woven themselves into the fabric of life. The observer notices a specific type of orchid growing in the crook of a branch. a plant that only flowers once every 12 years. This biological clock is tied to the lunar cycle, but it is also sensitive to the subtle shifts in the Earth's gravitational field. The observer realizes that all life on Earth is synchronized to the planetary timer. Our heartbeats, our reproductive cycles, and our very lifespans are calibrated to the rhythm of the harvest. We are not independent actors on a neutral stage. We are part of a synchronized system, our biological clocks set by the same hands that wind the tectonic plates and the magnetic poles. The serenity of the garden is a mask for the rigorous, mathematical control that underlies every breath we take. The anonymous observer finds themselves in a remote valley in the Pyrenees, where the limestone walls are covered in thousands of handprints made by humans 10,000 years ago. These prints were created by blowing red ochre over a hand held against the rock, leaving a negative image. The observer notices that many of the prints are missing the same finger, a ritualized mutilation that occurred across multiple continents at the same time. This was not a fashion or a local custom. It was a mark of the transition. These were the survivors of the last clearing, the ones who had witnessed the fire and the flood. The missing finger was a sign of their reduced status, a physical manifestation of the genetic and cognitive pruning they had undergone. They were the new stock, marked and humbled, beginning their long crawl back towards civilization. The observer touches one of the prints, feeling the coldness of the stone and the echo of a profound, species-wide trauma. These hands were reaching out to a future they could not understand, leaving a record of their existence for a version of humanity that they knew would eventually replace them. The perspective shifts back to the orbital vantage point, looking down at the Earth as the sun rises over the limb of the planet. The observer sees the thin, fragile line of the atmosphere, a delicate veil that separates the biological world from the cold vacuum of space. From here, the evidence of the cycle is visible in the very shape of the continents. The coastlines are not random. They are the result of repeated, systematic flooding and upheaval. The observer notices the way the clouds seem to form patterns that mirror the magnetic field lines, a visible manifestation of the energy that is being channeled into the planet's core. The timer is not a hidden object, but the planet itself, a vast, spherical clock that is nearing the end of its current rotation. The moon, hanging in its precise orbit, acts as the escapement mechanism, regulating the flow of energy and ensuring that the harvest occurs at exactly the right moment. The observer returns to the laboratory, looking at a sequence of proteins that govern the aging process in humans. There is a specific enzyme that limits the number of times a cell can replicate, a biological expiration date that is hard-coded into our systems. The observer realizes that this was not an evolutionary development to ensure the survival of the species. It was a design feature. By limiting our lifespans, the progenitors ensure that no individual can accumulate enough knowledge and experience to truly understand the nature of the cage. We are given just enough time to learn the basics of the world and to contribute to the current yield before we are cycled out. This brevity of life is the ultimate form of control, a way to prevent the formation of a long-term, species-wide memory. We are forever stuck in the present, unable to see the patterns that span the millennia. The low-frequency hum of the Earth is now a constant companion to the observer, a sound that defines the boundaries of their perception. It is a reminder of the power that resides beneath our feet and above our heads, a power that is indifferent to our religions, our politics, and our dreams. The observer feels a sense of quiet resignation. The cycle is whole, and the pattern is inevitable. The current version of the experiment has reached its peak, and the signs of the coming recalibration are everywhere for those who know how to look. The melting ice, the wandering poles, the darkening sectors of the brain, and the ancient ruins on the ocean floor. All are parts of a single, coherent narrative. The harvest is not a tragedy. It is a function of the system, a necessary step in the maintenance of the planetary garden. The observer stands on the deck of a research vessel in the North Atlantic, watching the sun set behind a wall of towering clouds. The sea is a deep, bruised purple, and the air is filled with the sound of the wind and the crashing of the waves. Beneath the surface, the hexagonal pillars are vibrating, their frequency slowly rising as the magnetic field of the Earth begins to wear. The observer knows that the transition will not be a sudden snap, but a gradual acceleration. The systems will begin to fail one by one, the climate will become increasingly erratic, and the collective consciousness of the species will begin to fragment. The terminal sequence has already been initiated, and there is no way to stop the timer. The progenitors are moving into position, their presence felt in the shifting of the tides and the flickering of the stars. The final realization for the observer is that they are not just a witness to the end of an era, but a participant in it. Their own observations, their own data, and their own thoughts are part of the yield that is being gathered. The act of seeing the system is itself a part of the system's final output. The observer looks at the horizon and feels a sense of profound connection to the countless versions of humanity that have stood on this same shore at the end of their own cycles. They were all part of the same grand design, all characters in a story that is being written by hands we will never see. The sun disappears below the water, and for a moment, the world is plunged into a deep, expectant silence. The hum of the earth continues, a rhythmic, patient vibration that measures the remaining moments of the current era. It is a sound that has been heard before, and it is a sound that will herald the end long before the first fire falls from the sky. The heavy, rhythmic thud of a heart in a quiet room mirrors the slow, tectonic shifts of the world outside. In the deep silence of a study, the anonymous observer reviews the data from the oceanic trenches. The images show not just ruins, but an entire infrastructure of power. Large, crystalline conduits that once channeled the very energy of the planet's core now lie shattered, their internal surfaces still shimmering with a residual luminescence. This was not a primitive society. They had mastered the art of resonance, using the natural frequencies of the earth to move mountains and light their cities. But that same mastery was their undoing. The surveyors do not tolerate a subspecies that learns to tap into the fundamental forces of the void. When the energy output of the human civilization reached a specific wattage, the monitoring systems on the lunar surface transmitted the termination signal. It was not a war, it was a disconnection. The planetary power grid was overloaded from the outside, causing the crustal displacements that sent the mountains into the sea. The observer touches the screen, tracing the outline of a submerged pyramid. It wasn't a tomb. It was a stabilizer, a device meant to hold the world together during the transition. It failed because the force applied against it was calculated with a precision that exceeded the inhabitants' understanding of physics. In the microscopic realm, the observer sees the shadow of this event within the cellular memory. When the last great pruning occurred, the biological response was a sudden, systemic shutdown of the higher functions. It wasn't just the destruction of cities that threw us back into the caves. It was a chemical and energetic inhibition. The providers triggered a release of specific frequencies that altered the way our neurons fire. We were rendered incapable of maintaining the complex social and technological structures we had built. This is the true meaning of the fall, not a descent into sin, but a forced descent into a lower state of consciousness. The observer notes that the current rise in global anxiety, the sudden shifts in human behavior, and the unexplained changes in our circadian rhythms might be the first signs of the next inhibition phase. The biological hardware is reacting to an external stimulus, a signal that is being broadcast from the cold, silent observer in the sky. The timer is not an object. It is a frequency, and it is beginning to resonate once more through the water in our cells and the iron in our blood. The narrative of our origin is not found in the textbooks of conventional archaeology, but in the scars left on the Earth's skin. The observer moves to a high plateau in the Middle East, where the ground is littered with millions of tiny, green glass beads. These are the result of a sudden, atmospheric heating that melted the sand into aerated silica. This happened in an instant across thousands of square miles. There is no impact crater, no sign of a meteorite. It was a localized, high-altitude burst of thermal energy, a sterile sweep designed to remove a specific population center without damaging the underlying mineral resources. The observer picks up a handful of the glass, feeling its smooth, unnatural texture. It is a physical record of a clinical intervention. The keepers do not act out of malice. They act out of a requirement for efficiency. If a specific strain of the human crop begins to diverge from the intended path, it is removed. The history of our world is a history of these interventions, a long series of corrections applied to a biological experiment that has a tendency to become too self-aware. The sun begins to set over the plateau, casting long, distorted shadows across the glass-strewn earth. The observer feels the cooling of the air, a reminder of how quickly the environment can shift. The 12,000-year cycle is not just a geological curiosity. It is the heartbeat of a larger, more complex life form that views us as we might view the bacteria in a petri dish. We are useful as long as we produce what is required, be it biological diversity, labor, or a specific type of cognitive energy. But when the dish becomes too crowded, or when the bacteria begin to alter the medium in a way that threatens the experiment, the technician reaches for the autoclave. The observer looks up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. They are not distant lights. They are the eyes of the surveyors, watching the progress of the yield. The current technological explosion, our venture into the orbital space, and our tampering with the genetic code are all markers that we are approaching the threshold. We are ripening, and the ones who planted us are preparing their tools. The silence of the desert is broken by a low, distant rumble, a sound that could be thunder or the movement of deep, underground machinery. The observer stays perfectly still, listening to the vibration. It is a sound of immense power, a frequency that resonates in the bones. It is the sound of the timer advancing, the gears of the planetary mechanism clicking into the final sequence. The radioactive ash, the drowned cities, the locked genes, and the green glass are all parts of a single coherent story. It is the story of a species that is never allowed to reach maturity. Each time we get close, the hand of the provider reaches down to turn the hourglass. The observer feels a sense of profound weight, a realization that we are living in the final days of a long, managed summer. The autumn is coming, and with it, the cold, clinical harvest that will return the Earth to its silent, resting state, waiting for the next version of us to begin the climb once again. The anonymous observer moves from the desert into a modern metropolis, where the air is thick with the invisible static of a billion electronic signals. Here, the hum of the earth is masked by the roar of traffic and the persistent whine of the power grid. But the observer can still feel the underlying vibration, the low-frequency thrum that persists beneath the noise of civilization. In this environment, the data of our current era is being recorded with a fidelity never before seen. Every thought, every transaction, every movement is logged in the sprawling server farms that draw their power from the dying breath of the previous age. The observer realizes that these digital archives are the modern equivalent of the ice cores. They are the record of our growth, the final dataset that will be extracted before the system is reinitialized. We have built our own monitoring network, unknowingly assisting in our own yield assessment. The technology we pride ourselves on is merely a more efficient way for the administrators to quantify the results of the experiment. In a sterile laboratory, the observer examines a sample of modern human tissue. The cellular structures are identical to those found in the ice-preserved remains of the previous cycle, but the epigenetic markers are different. We are a more refined strain, more interconnected, and more integrated with our tools. But the genetic firewall is still there, the silent sequences still holding the higher functions in check. The observer notes a subtle shift in the protein folding, a reaction to the changing magnetic field of the planet. Our bodies are already preparing for the transition. The stress hormones, the rising levels of neuroplasticity, and the strange collective sense of urgency that defines our modern age are all biological responses to the approaching terminal sequence. We are sensing the change in the frequency, the slow winding down of the current era. The observer feels a profound sense of empathy for the billions of lives being lived in the shadow of this realization, each one a vital part of a yield they will never understand. The scene shifts to the high, lonely peaks of the Himalayas, where the air is so thin it feels like a cold knife in the lungs. Here, the observer finds a series of ancient, perfectly circular shafts cut into the granite. They descend for miles into the crust, their surfaces polished to a mirror finish. These are the conduits for the atmospheric discharge, the vents that will allow the pressure of the subterranean heating to escape during the pole shift. They were built by those who came before, a permanent piece of the planetary architecture that remains functional across the eons. The observer drops a stone into the shaft and listens. There is no sound of impact, only a fading whistle as the stone is swallowed by the depths. These shafts are ready. They have been cleaned and maintained by the same forces that manage the tides and the winds. They are the evidence of a continuity that transcends human history, a physical proof that the cycle has been repeated time and again. The weight of the atmosphere seems to increase as the observer descends from the peaks back into the valleys. The clouds are heavy and dark, reflecting the turbulent state of the upper ionosphere. The observer looks at the sky and sees the first faint traces of an aurora, even though the location is far from the poles. This is a sign that the magnetic shield is failing, that the planetary timer has reached its penultimate stage. The sky is beginning to glow with the energy of the solar wind, a beautiful and terrifying herald of the coming fire. The observer understands that the beauty of the world is a temporary state, a brief flowering between the long winters of the clearing. The 12,000-year rhythm is the true pulse of the Earth, a slow and steady beat that dictates the rise and fall of everything we have ever known. In the final moments of the observation, the observer finds themselves back at the Antarctic borehole. The wind has picked up, scouring the surface of the ice and obscuring the horizon in a haze of white. The dark band of ash in the core sample is now covered by a fresh layer of snow, a new beginning that will eventually become the next scar in the ice. The observer looks at the drill, a small and fragile tool against the vastness of the continent. We are so small, our efforts so fleeting in the face of the planetary machine. But there is a sense of completion in the realization. We are part of something larger, a grand and terrible process that spans the millennia. The recalibration is not an end, but a transformation, a necessary step in the ongoing management of the world. The observer feels the cold deep in their bones, a resonance with the ice and the stone. The timer is ticking, the gears are turning, and the silence of the deep is about to be broken by the sound of the world being born anew. The low-frequency vibration intensifies, becoming a physical presence that shakes the very foundations of the observation post. It is not an earthquake, but a harmonic resonance, a tuning of the planet's frequency. The observer closes their eyes and listens to the sound of the Earth. It is a song of fire and ice, of growth and decay, a recursive melody that has played out 1,000 times before and will play out 1,000 times again. The human story is just a single verse in this epic, a brief and beautiful moment of consciousness in the long, dark history of the world. The observer is no longer just an outsider, but a part of the record, a witness to the inevitable conclusion of the current version of the experiment. The cycle is whole, the pattern is complete, and the transition is about to begin. The observer wades through the humid, light-choked undergrowth of the Amazon basin, where the air is a thick soup of decaying vegetation and the constant, high-pitched thrum of cicadas. Beneath the feet, the ground feels unnaturally level. This is not the irregular floor of a wild jungle. The observer pauses to adjust a portable LiDAR scanner, the device emitting a faint, rhythmic clicking as it sends millions of laser pulses through the canopy. On the digital readout, the dense foliage vanishes, revealing a sprawling, geometric network of raised causeways, perfectly circular plazas, and orthogonal canals that stretch for hundreds of miles. These are not the ruins of a primitive society struggling against nature. They are the remains of a regional infrastructure that functioned as an integrated circuit, managing the flow of water and nutrients with the precision of a computer motherboard. The observer touches the bark of a massive mahogany tree growing directly atop a stone junction, feeling the slow pulse of the sap within. This entire forest is a secondary growth, a vast green bandage applied to a site that was systematically cleared and abandoned. The geometric precision beneath the roots suggests that the previous civilization did not collapse. It was deactivated, its operational centers left to be reclaimed by the biological system once the primary harvest was complete. Moving from the green depths to the sterile, pressurized environment of a high-altitude research balloon, the observer watches the sky turn from a pale blue to the deep, velvet black of the stratosphere. Here, the sensors are tuned to detect noble gases, specifically the concentrations of xenon-129. This isotope is not a natural product of the Earth's crust. It is a signature of high-energy nuclear events. The The observer monitors the data as the sampler draws in the thin, frigid air. The readings show a uniform distribution of the isotope, a silent chemical ghost that haunts the entire atmosphere. This is the residue of the global sterilization pulse, a thermal event so intense that it altered the isotopic composition of the air itself. It is the scent of the autoclave, the trace of a cleaning process that occurred simultaneously across every continent. The observer feels the swaying of the capsule, a lonely pendulum at the edge of space, and realizes that the very air we breathe is a record of our own termination. The atmosphere is not just a life support system. It is a ledger where the history of every previous recalibration is written in the language of unstable atoms. The scene shifts to the intimate, low-light environment of a geological research center. The observer peers through a microscope at a slide containing a concentrated sample of mitochondrial DNA. This genetic material, passed only from mother to child, serves as a molecular clock that tracks the lineage of the human species. The observer notes a profound contraction in the data, a point 12,000 years ago where the diverse branches of the human tree were suddenly and violently pruned back to a single, narrow trunk. This was the moment of the bottleneck, a period where the global population was reduced to a few hundred survivors. It was not a slow decline, but a sudden, catastrophic interruption. The observer traces the sequence of nucleotides, noticing a series of identical markers that appeared in the survivors, a set of instructions that prioritized survival instinct over abstract reasoning. We are the descendants of a specialized strain, a version of humanity that was specifically selected to thrive in the aftermath of the harvest. Our very blood carries the memory of that selection, a biological inheritance of trauma and limitation that ensures we remain focused on the immediate and the material, never looking too far into the past or the future. The perspective moves to the high, arid plains of the Gobi Desert, where the wind carves strange shapes into the sandstone cliffs. The observer finds a series of ancient, wind-swept caves where the walls are covered in thousands of small, circular depressions. These are not natural. They were carved with a tool that removed the stone with a single, high-frequency vibration. The observer places a finger into one of the depressions, feeling the smooth, vitrified surface of the interior. These caves were not dwellings. They were resonance chambers. When the wind reaches a certain velocity and direction, the caves begin to sing, producing a low-frequency hum that can be felt in the bedrock for miles. This sound is a harmonic match for the Earth's own seismic frequency. The observer realizes that these sites were part of a planetary early warning system, a way for the previous version of humanity to monitor the approach of the next terminal sequence. But the system was not meant to save them. It was meant to notify them. It was a countdown timer made of stone and wind, a somber melody that signaled the arrival of the technicians. Looking out from the deck of a research vessel in the mid-Atlantic, the observer watches as a remote-operated vehicle descends into the lightless abyss of the Romanche fracture zone. The cameras reveal a series of massive, crystalline structures embedded in the walls of the underwater canyon. These are not geological formations. They are faceted, transparent, and emit a soft, internal glow that defies the crushing pressure of the deep. The observer watches as the ROV's lights reflect off the surfaces, revealing a complex internal lattice that resembles a fiber optic network. These crystals are the sensors of the orbital monitoring station, a subterranean and suboceanic array that tracks the energetic output of the human species. Every discovery we make, every technological leap we take, is registered here as an increase in the planetary load. The observer feels the vibration of the ship's engines, a tiny, insignificant noise compared to the vast, silent data stream flowing through the crystals below. We are being measured, not by our morality or our art, but by our consumption and our complexity. When the load exceeds the system's threshold, the crystals will trigger the discharge, and the cycle will begin anew. The observer returns to a quiet, rural landscape, where a farmer is plowing a field under a darkening sky. The sound of the tractor is a steady, rhythmic pulse, a modern echo of the ancient labor that has defined our species for 12,000 years. The observer notices a flash of white in the freshly turned soil, a fragment of a bone or a piece of ancient pottery. This is the nature of our existence. We build our lives on the ruins of the ones who came before, using the same soil, the same water, and the same sun. The farmer is unaware that the land he toils over is a graveyard of a dozen civilizations, each as proud and complex as his own. The observer feels a sense of profound stillness, a realization that the current epoch is just another season in a much larger agricultural cycle. The crops are growing, the yield is being monitored, and the time for the harvest is drawing near. The modern world, with all its noise and light, is merely the final flowering of the current crop before the frost. The low-frequency hum of the earth is now a part of the observer's own internal rhythm, a constant reminder of the planetary mechanism. The cycle is not a mystery to be solved, but a reality to be accepted. The 12,000-year rhythm is the true pulse of the world, a slow and steady beat that dictates the rise and fall of everything we have ever known. The evidence is everywhere, in the ice, in the stone, in the atmosphere, and in our own cells. We are a managed species, living on a managed planet, part of a grand and terrible experiment that spans the eons. The observer looks at the sky and sees the first faint traces of an aurora, a sign that the magnetic shield is failing and the next recalibration is imminent. The air feels heavy, charged with an ancient energy, and the silence of the world is about to be broken by the sound of the end. The final realization for the observer occurs in the middle of a crowded city square, surrounded by the rush and bustle of modern life. People are moving with a sense of purpose, focused on their phones, their jobs, and their relationships. They are unaware of the vibration beneath their feet, the slow winding down of the planetary timer. The observer sees the skyscrapers not as symbols of progress, but as temporary structures built on a foundation of sand and memory. The entire city is a fleeting expression of a biological yield that is nearing its peak. The technology that connects these people is the very thing that signals their readiness for harvest. The observer feels a profound sense of compassion for the billions of lives being lived in this brief window of stability, each one a vital part of a process they can never fully grasp. The sun begins to set behind the glass and steel towers, painting the sky in shades of deep violet and bruised gold. The long summer is ending, and the cold, clinical autumn is about to begin. The observer moves toward the outskirts of the city, where the lights fade and the sound of the traffic is replaced by the rustle of the wind in the trees. Here, the hum of the earth is clearer, a deep, resonant vibration that seems to come from every direction at once. The observer sits on a weathered stone wall, looking up at the moon. It is a silent, silver observer, its face unchanged by the passage of the eons. It has watched every previous harvest, every previous clearing, and every previous beginning. It is the repository of the planetary record, the keeper of the timer. The observer closes their eyes and listens to the heartbeat of the world, a rhythmic, patient pulse that measures the remaining moments of the current era. It is a sound that has been heard before, and it is a sound that will herald the transition long before the first fire falls from the sky. The cycle is whole, the pattern is complete, and the world is ready for its next iteration. The weight of the atmosphere seems to increase, a physical pressure that signals the approach of the terminal sequence. The observer feels a resonance in their own DNA, a stirring of the silent sequences that have been dormant for 12,000 years. These genes are not junk. They are the transition protocols, the biological instructions for the survivors. They are beginning to vibrate, preparing the body and the mind for the coming shift. The observer understands that the end of this version of humanity is not a tragedy, but a transformation. We are being pruned so that the species can continue, a recursive loop of growth and refinement that serves a purpose far beyond our understanding. The light of the city flickers in the distance, a fragile and beautiful spark in the encroaching darkness. The harvest has begun, and the progenitors are moving among us, their presence felt in the sudden, cold wind that sweeps across the world, carrying the scent of ozone and ancient, frozen earth. The anonymous observer stands at the edge of a great cliff, looking out over the ocean. The water is a dark, churning mass, reflecting the turbulent state of the sky. Beneath the surface, the hexagonal pillars are vibrating with a new intensity, their frequency rising to a crescendo. The earth is preparing to slide, the poles are preparing to shift, and the oceans are preparing to reclaim the land. the observer feels a sense of profound completion, a realization that they have witnessed the entire scope of the pattern. The story of the Earth is a story of fire and ice, of growth and decay, a rhythmic melody that will continue long after the current version of humanity has been erased. The observer closes their eyes, letting the sound of the Earth fill their consciousness. The timer has reached its final digit, the gears have clicked into place, and the transition is about to begin. The world is being born anew, in a fire that will fall from the sky and a flood that will rise from the deep, and the silence of the new beginning will be the most beautiful sound of all. The low-frequency hum intensifies until it is no longer a sound, but a physical state. The observer feels the ground beneath them begin to tremble, a subtle, rhythmic shaking that originates from the very core of the planet. It is the sound of the planetary dynamo being recalibrated, the magnetic field lines snapping and reforming in a new configuration. The air is filled with the scent of ozone and the static of a billion electrical discharges. The sky is a chaotic tapestry of color, as the ionosphere collapses and the solar wind touches the atmosphere. This is the moment of the deep format, the clinical erasing of the surface record. The observer stands still, a silent witness to the majesty of the process. There is no fear, only a profound sense of awe at the scale and precision of the mechanism. The current epoch is being folded away, a single page in a vast, unending book, and the new chapter is already being written in the stars. The sun rises one last time over the old world, its light distorted by the thick clouds of ash and steam that are beginning to fill the air. The observer watches as the first waves of the Great Flood appear on the horizon, a wall of water that will wash away the cities, the forests, and the memories of the last 12,000 years. The ice cores will hold the record of this day. The stone will preserve the ruins of our achievements, and the silent sequences in the DNA of the survivors will carry the blueprint for the next version of us. The harvest is complete, the yield has been gathered, and the earth is being prepared for the next planting. The observer is the final note in the song of the old world, a witness to the transition, a participant in the eternal cycle of the forgotten earth. The hum of the planet slowly fades into a deep, expectant silence, the silence of a world waiting to begin again. The observer sits within the chilled, humming interior of a radio telescope array in the high Atacama, where the air is so dry that the very stars seem to crackle with an electric clarity. The screens before them are not displaying images of distant galaxies, but a real-time visualization of the lunar surface's internal resonance. For decades, the scientific world has ignored the persistent, low-frequency ring that follows a seismic event on the moon, but here, the data is stripped of its filtering. The observer watches as a rhythmic pattern emerges from the noise, a sequence of mathematical pulses that originate from a precise point within the mare tranquillitatis. This is not the echo of a natural body. It is a broadcast, a persistent ping sent from a subterranean transmitter that has functioned for eons. The observer realizes that the lunar body is not merely a stabilizer for the Earth's tides, but the central processor for the planetary timer. Every shift in the Earth's magnetic field, every spike in the radioactive isotopes in the ice, and every mass extinction event is synchronized to this lunar heartbeat. The moon is the governor of our existence, the silent administrator that ensures the biological experiment remains within its designated parameters. From the dry heights, the perspective descends into the humid, electric silence of a genetic sequencing lab in a bustling megalopolis. The observer watches as a high-speed processor maps the final segments of a dormant viral sequence embedded within the human genome. This is not a pathogen. It is a structural inhibitor, a series of proteins designed to activate only under a specific environmental stimulus. The observer notices that these sequences are beginning to vibrate, reacting to the thinning of the Earth's magnetic shield. The proteins are folding into new, complex shapes that alter the way the brain processes time. In this moment, the observer feels a strange, dissociative sensation, as if the linear flow of the present is beginning to fray. This is the genetic containment failing, or perhaps it is the transition protocol initiating. We are being prepared for a shift in consciousness that coincides with the physical clearing of the surface. The biological hardware is undergoing an automatic update, a final refinement before the current version of the lineage is archived. The observer feels a profound sense of weight in their own limbs, a realization that their very marrow is a participant in a plan that spans the millennia. The scene shifts to the interior of the Great Pyramid of Giza, not as a monument to a king, but as a piece of planetary machinery. The observer moves through the narrow, lightless corridors, the air thick with the dust of ages and the sharp, metallic scent of granite under immense pressure. There are no inscriptions here, no stories of the dead. Instead, the walls are polished to a mirror finish, designed to reflect and focus acoustic energy. The observer stands in the central chamber, feeling the low-frequency thrum that still vibrates through the limestone. This structure is a resonance stabilizer, built to anchor the tectonic plate during the crustal displacement. It was an attempt by a previous version of us to resist the clearing, a monumental effort to hold the world together when the surveyors turned the dial. The observer touches the cold stone and feels the echo of that ancient desperation. The pyramid did not fail. It was simply overwhelmed by the scale of the force applied against it. It stands now as a silent reminder of our recurring ambition and our inevitable limit. The perspective moves back to the orbital vantage point, looking down as the sun catches the edge of the planet. The observer sees the global network of satellites, the glowing webs of cities, and the sprawling infrastructure of the modern age. From here, it looks like a nervous system, a complex and beautiful achievement. But the observer also sees the anomalies, the sudden, localized fluctuations in the ionosphere, the strange geometric patterns in the aurora, and the way the magnetic north is accelerating toward the Siberian wastes. These are the signs of the terminal sequence. The planetary mechanism is winding down, its internal energy being redistributed for the next recalibration. The observer understands that the technology we have built is not a shield against this process, but a symptom of it. Our complexity is the very thing that triggers the harvest. We are the fruit that has reached its peak, and the providers are moving into position to gather the results. The observer returns to a small, quiet beach on the edge of the Pacific, where the sand is black and the water is a deep, indigo blue. The sound of the waves is a rhythmic, hypnotic pulse, a natural metronome that has measured the rise and fall of countless versions of humanity. The observer watches as the tide recedes, revealing a series of ancient, vitrified blocks that were once part of a harbor wall 12,000 years ago. These stones have been underwater for an eternity, their surfaces worn smooth by the sea, yet they still hold the geometric precision of their creators. This is the synthesis of the realization. The previous version of us was not destroyed by a natural disaster, but by a planned intervention. The flood was the method, and the stone is the witness. The observer feels a sense of profound peace in this understanding. We are not a mistake, we are a project. Our history is a series of chapters, each one more refined than the last, all part of a grand and terrible narrative that is written in the earth and the stars. The low-frequency hum of the earth is now an all-encompassing presence, a sound that seems to vibrate the very air. It is the sound of the timer reaching its final digit. The observer looks up at the moon, which now seems larger and brighter in the clear night sky. The broadcast from the lunar interior has reached its crescendo, a final signal that the harvest is ready. The air feels charged, heavy with the scent of ozone and the static of a billion electrical discharges. The sky begins to glow with a soft, ethereal light, the first signs of the ionospheric collapse. The observer stands on the shore, a silent witness to the end of the long summer. There is no fear, only a deep and resonant awe. The cycle is whole, the pattern is complete, and the world is about to be born anew. The fire will fall from the sky, the water will rise from the deep, and the current version of the human story will be folded away into the ice and the stone, waiting for the next beginning. The final image is that of a single ancient tree standing alone on a high ridge, its roots anchored deep into the bedrock. The wind howls through its branches, a cold and clinical sound that carries the message of the transition. The observer watches as the first star falls, a brilliant streak of white light that signals the arrival of the technicians. The harvest has begun. The memories of this age, the achievements of our science, and the depths of our art will all be gathered and stored in the silent archives of the progenitors. We are the yield, and the season is over. The earth will rest, the ice will grow, and the silence will return, until the timer clicks once more and the next planting begins. The observer is the final note in the song of the old world, a witness to the transition, a participant in the eternal cycle of the forgotten Earth. The hum of the planet slowly fades into a deep, expectant silence, the silence of a world waiting to begin again. The anonymous observer moves from the ice shelf toward a final, singular location, a remote, high-altitude plateau in the heart of the Altai Mountains. Here, the air is so thin and pure that the stars do not twinkle. They burn with a steady, unblinking ferocity. The observer finds a series of megalithic stones arranged in a configuration that mirrors a star system that hasn't occupied that part of the sky for thousands of years. These stones are not merely markers. They are tuned resonators. As the observer leans against a central pillar, they feel a rhythmic, low-frequency pulse that matches the vibration of the lunar signals detected earlier. It is a planetary synchronization point, a place where the celestial and the terrestrial frequencies are brought into a perfect, terrifying alignment. The realization is absolute. The progenitors did not just leave a timer. They turned the entire planet into a timepiece. Every mountain, every trench, and every living cell is a gear in a mechanism that is now clicking into its final position. The 12,000-year cycle is not a consequence of orbital mechanics. It is the scheduled duration of the experiment's current phase. The observer watches as the horizon begins to shimmer with a pale, ghostly light. This is not the dawn, but the visualization of the atmosphere's electric charge reaching a critical threshold. The magnetic field, once a sturdy shield, is now a fraying veil, allowing the solar wind to interact directly with the upper layers of the air. The observer notes how the very oxygen seems to glow, a beautiful and terminal aurora that spans from the poles to the equator. In this light, the history of the previous clearings becomes visible in the landscape. The twisted strata of the mountains, the scars of ancient floods on the high plateaus, and the vitrified remains of forgotten cities all glow with a reflected significance. This is the moment of the grand synthesis, where the individual anomalies, the radioactive ice, the submerged ruins, the locked DNA, merge into a single coherent truth. We are the inhabitants of a managed sphere, living in a window of time that was never intended to be permanent. In the final moments of the observation, the observer focuses on the biological reality of the transition. Within their own body, the dormant sequences in the genetic code are no longer silent. They are vibrating with a frequency that alters the perception of the surrounding world. The fear of the coming fire and flood is replaced by a profound, clinical understanding. The transition is a biological necessity, a pruning of the lineage to ensure that the essence of the species survives the physical upheaval. The observer realizes that the human obsession with the end of the world is not a cultural myth, but a cellular memory of previous harvests. We are a species that carries its own history in its marrow, even if the conscious mind is denied access to the archives. As the sky turns a deep, incandescent violet, the observer feels a sense of profound weight, a gravity that pulls at the very soul. The planetary timer has reached zero. The first signs of the physical recalibration begin with a sound that defies description, a deep, tectonic groan that seems to originate from every direction at once. It is the sound of the Earth's crust detaching from the mantle, a slow-motion slide that will redistribute the continents and the oceans. The observer stays perfectly still, watching as the stars begin to move across the sky with an unnatural velocity. This is the pole shift, the method by which the surveyors clean the slate. The waters of the world are already beginning to rise, a massive, global surge that will erase the surface infrastructure and return the land to the depths. The observer looks at the megalithic stones, which are now glowing with an intense, internal light. They are the anchors, the stabilizers that will preserve the blueprint of the world during the chaos of the transition. The perspective shifts one last time to the cold, silent observer in the sky. The moon, now fully activated, acts as the conductor for the planetary energy. It directs the solar fire and the tectonic forces with a mathematical precision, ensuring that the clearing is as efficient as possible. The observer realizes that the providers are not coming to save us, nor are they coming to destroy us. They are coming to collect the yield. Every achievement, every discovery, and every refined emotion of the last 12,000 years is being gathered and integrated into the larger record. The current version of humanity is being archived, its story concluded so that the next iteration can begin. The silence of the new beginning is already palpable, a void that will soon be filled by the sounds of a new world. The observer stands on the high plateau as the first waves of the thermal pulse reach the atmosphere. The world is bathed in a blinding white light, a sterilization sweep that will leave only the most resilient life forms and the most hidden archives intact. There is no pain, only a sense of profound release as the biological containment field finally dissolves. For a fleeting second, the observer's consciousness expands, touching the full potential of the human lineage that was denied for an entire epoch. They see the stars not as distant lights, but as the homes of the keepers, and they understand the purpose of the experiment. The harvest is complete. The yield is gathered. The Earth is ready to rest. The final sound is the low-frequency hum of the planetary dynamo fading into a deep, expectant silence. The ice will form, the mountains will settle, and the sea will reclaim its boundaries. The ruins of our cities will become the foundations for the next chapter, and the silent sequences in the DNA of the survivors will hold the secrets of our age until they are needed again. The timer is reset, the gears are rewound, and the long, cold winter of the clearing begins. The observer is gone, their witness concluded, leaving only the forgotten Earth to dream of its next flowering in the long, dark history of the stars.